Hi, I'm Tiffany Trader, managing editor of HPC Wire, and I'm joined by Karl Freund, founder and principal analyst of Cambrian AI Research. Karl, you're something of an expert on the AI ecosystem, in addition to being a longtime analyst in the HP space. So we've been running into each other for a while.
Yeah, nice to see you again, Tiffany. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
You as well. So you're going to be giving a presentation at the upcoming AI Hardware Summit, which takes place in Santa Clara, California, September 13th and 15th. That is co-located with the Edge AI Summit and run by Kisako Research, a firm out of the UK that you've been working with for a while. Can you tell us first a bit about your background and technology interests as an analyst?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks for having me on, reaching out to me. I'm pretty passionate about this summit. My background is I've been a marketing and technologist at mostly server companies and semiconductor companies, HPE, IBM, AMD, Calzada, and so forth. And I got a call from this guy with a lovely British accent named Ed Nelson about 5 years ago. And Ed said, "Hey, Karl, I read your stuff on Forbes. I've been an analyst for about 5 years now, and I write about AI chips. I want to do an AI chip summit." And I'm like, well, the problem is that the attendees would all be competitors to each other, and they may not want to come. But the space is growing so dramatically. It's so dynamic every year. Maybe you're right. Maybe this will work. And the rest is history. It's probably the most successful and attended AI platform for collaboration, for learning, for networking in the industry that I'm aware of. It does have a strong focus on AI hardware, both in the data center and now edge. But it's also about how do you decide what hardware is the best to use and what's coming down the pike? Right? A lot of the startups presenting here will be talking about technology that won't ship until maybe next year. But you need to plan for that if you're considering a large-scale AI deployment. So I'm super excited about this conference. It always has great speakers, myself accepted, of course, but I come on every year. Ed, bless his heart, Ed always gives me a spot after the keynote. It's like, following some of the biggest luminaries in the industry, gives you the willies. But I just talk about the landscape, just kind of give people a who's who at the zoo in 20, 25 minutes about what I've seen in the last year that impressed me or disappointed me in the development of AI semiconductors.
Yeah, you mentioned the keynotes. I mean, the first conference was in 2018 at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View. So it's 5 years now. It's made it through the pandemic years, went virtual or hybrid for a couple of years. Hosted many AI startup and companies that we know the names of. John Hennessy gave the keynote at least twice, I think. But you mentioned your presentation will be an update on the landscape of AI acceleration. Without giving too much away, do you want to give us just a little bit of the highlights? And
but then nobody will come. They can just watch your video. Yeah, I think it's every year we get a little closer to reality and a little farther from just PowerPoint. And initially it was Cambrian AI is all about the Cambrian explosion of AI, right? Well, first it was just an explosion in PowerPoint slides, right? Not semiconductors, not some working silicon. That's definitely changing now. I mean, Google is on their 4th generation GPUs. Cerebras is on their 2nd generation wafer scale engine. GraphCore is on their 2nd generation. So I've always said or speculated that most people won't adopt at scale until people see the 2nd generation chip. 2 points makes a line, 3 points makes a trend. People want to know where this stuff is headed before they make any decisions to change their platform or consider other platforms. So it's maturing. We're still probably in the bottom of the 2nd inning, so we've still got a lot of game to play. But this year's been pretty dramatic. There will be a lot of important companies will be there. Samba Nova's presenting and others. There'll be some that aren't presenting there, and one can wonder why. There's only two choices: either too busy selling, working product, developing next generation product. I guess the third generation is their stuff doesn't work. They don't want to face the music, and you've probably got a smattering of all the above for the guys who don't attend. But the people who are attending, for the most part, are to be taken seriously, and they're all doing different things. GraphCore doesn't look anything like a Cerebrus, doesn't look like a Samanova. They've all got a different approach, and I find it intellectually stimulating and just a lot of fun listening to these people talk about their technology. Because if you're developing AI, a machine learning platform, you want to make sure you're using the best hardware you can get your hands on. Well, this is the best place to go to find out what's coming, right? It's also a place to find out what other people are doing, and learn from them, learn from what's working and perhaps what's not. Sorry, my microphone just dropped. But the Hugging Face, for example, first day is having a full session with different hardware vendors, talking about large language models, deployment on novel silicon. And you'll learn a lot if you're developing large language models, which are, of course, the next big thing with transformers. So that's the first day. And then after that, you'll have the keynote, and Lip-Band 2 will be there, as well as lots of other important hardware vendors and solution providers and tool providers. Cadence and Synopsys, for example, will both be there. So lots to talk about, lots to learn, and the networking is always the highlight for me as well. Just talking to people, getting them to say things they may not want to say on stage.
As a journalist, I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, that would never happen.
Yeah, that's the good part about getting back out there on the circuit, for sure.
Face to face, finally.
Face to face, finally, right? So there are a lot of companies in the AI technology space. You mentioned a number of them. Would you say that number is still on the rise, starting to flatten off, or starting to converge?
So I think it's probably staying about the same, but the maturity of the companies is taken then again from the PowerPoint to real solutions. So the nature of the conversations have changed. People are switching, I think, from talking about benchmarks, which are important. I'm a big fan of MLPerf and ML Commons, but they're switching more to real world use cases. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Meta has to say. They're actually doing a keynote that whenever they speak, you learn all kinds of amazing things, like, oh, by the way, we're doing 200 trillion inferences per day. That was 3 years ago. So you get a lot of interesting things from the guys who are using this hardware, instead of just guys selling the hardware, right? I mean, yeah, you're going to have to listen to some sales pitches, but in those sales pitches, you'll also learn about technology innovation that can allow we were talking before the recording, Tiffany, about, well, trillion parameter models are a thing now. Where's that going? Can I get the benefits of something like GPT-3 or GPT-4 without spending millions of dollars training, and being able to use more efficient platforms, hardware and software? So the conference is also changing in another important way, which is really evolving from chips to systems, right? Real working platforms that the system becomes and the software become the solution, not just a chip.
So there's a lot of players in the AI tech space, maybe dozens of them, but there's one that's still dominant. I think we would agree on, NVIDIA.
Yes.
Do you think there has been disruption? Do you think there will be disruption to the prominence of GPUs?
Wow, that's a loaded question. It's always the one investors want the answer to. My opinion is that the nature of the beast is changing. That I've always said it's not a question of if, it's a question of when someone would have a higher performance chip. And Google TPU v4 for specific models seems to be faster. Is it fast enough to get people to switch? I don't think so. But more importantly, the software moat that NVIDIA enjoys building bridges across, I guess is the metaphor, is deeper and wider than ever. You look at what NVIDIA is delivering at a high level, not just CUDA. CUDA's important, don't get me wrong, but the stuff above CUDA is where the action is for medical, for robotics, for autonomous vehicles. It's for the metaverse, right? They have probably the most financially impactful metaverse platform, which they call Omniverse, in the industry, because people are using it to design factories and design products. It's a real engineering tool. So anyway, I'm waxing a little bit on them, but maybe time to wane. I do believe NVIDIA's lead is not insurmountable. There's room for all that are good to lift, but the nature is changing.
And you brought up AI benchmarking, and as I think you just alluded, there is finally some competition there for NVIDIA in the MLPerf benchmark, for example. Are you finding the benchmarks helpful, and what direction do you think that they will be headed in?
I think the benchmarks will continue to form a basis for people to understand. Sorry, this keeps going out.
I apologize. The benchmarks form a basis for people to evaluate what they're doing, okay, whether they publish it or not, right? So you take a look at folks like Samanova and Grok. They haven't published them. I bet you anything they've run them. They know where their platform excels. They know where they have work to do. And the same is true for Cerebras and everybody else. So the real value I think the ML Commons is providing is as a service to the entire industry, as well as a marketing tool for the winners of benchmarks to tout their results.
How do you compare and assess AI technologies? Like what dynamics are you looking at?
Well, that's a hard question. You're tempted to do performance per chip, latency per chip, and power per chip, right? Those are really the three important things. But I keep having to remind myself that it's the system that matters, not the chip, right? So you say, well, Qualcomm AI 100 for inference processing is roughly half the performance of an NVIDIA A100. Yeah, but it's considerably less expensive too, and consumes maybe 1/6 the power of, let's say, an NVIDIA A2. 1/6 the power. Whoa. Well, if you're doing 200, 300, 500 trillion inferences per day, that's a big power bill. So what matters in a benchmark depends on what you're trying to do. So if I'm deploying a half a trillion or a trillion or 500 trillion inferences per day, what matters is going to be power and consistent performance. If I'm doing factory automation and I just need an AI processor on the edge, what really matters is cost performance, totally different metric. So, and the same could be true for just about anything else. Autonomous vehicles, what matters is dependency and reliability and redundancy. For drones, what matters is light and weight. Excellent performance, very low latency, very lightweight and low power, where NVIDIA's Jetson seems to be doing really, really well. So, you know, the lens through which you look at a benchmark will determine what you see that you like and what you see that's not going to meet your needs.
So how do the consumers of AI technologies make their decisions?
Well, they invariably go through a process of of understanding what's possible, then validating what's possible in their own labs, because it's their software that matters, not ML, not an ML perf benchmark, which has a lot of similarities. But if you're running recommendation engines, you'll start with a DLRM benchmark result, and then you'll figure out what your specific application, if you're Facebook or Amazon or Google or eBay or whoever, you'll figure out what matters to you and what the system requirements are to deliver the performance and latency and cost and power consumption that you need to hit, right?
What would you say about the barriers to entry for AI for non-hyperscalers, and what's being done to address them?
The barriers to entry into those accounts, or the barriers to entry for semiconductor
to use AI technologies?
It's still skills. That's why conferences like AI Hardware Summit and others are so important. That people spend the time, listen and talk, have conversations, because those skills are what will determine the path to success for you to deploy AI in your organization.
And you brought up larger and larger language models. We had touched on that a little pre-call. They're hitting 1 trillion parameters, these LLMs. What kind of technology approaches are best suited for that, and what are the challenges there?
Oh, that's an hour-long conversation. There's so much going on in that space. It's really exciting. Obviously, trying to do with fewer parameters is important. I mean, everybody wants to do brain scale, right, which is roughly 100 trillion parameters. That's going to be very expensive. I mean, just doing GPT-3 cost about $12 million.
Train it. That's just train it once. So getting smaller models to work as well as the big models is number one. And there's techniques you can use for like sparsity. There's conditional execution. Both Google and TensorTorrent are experimenting or delivering conditional execution, which basically says stop training when the model you built will be good enough. Well, how do you know? Well, there's a lot of technology underneath that answers that question, that says, you know what, stop training. The model you're producing meets your objective.
Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of techniques people are using to get more out of less hardware, get more out of shorter training times to produce. But my colleague Alberto Romero really specializes in these large language models. So followers may want to pick him up on Medium, where he publishes fascinating reports on everything from bringing people back from the dead using large language models, which is one he published this morning, to how would an AI produce Van Gogh's Starry Night? What would it look like? What could it look like with just a few short prompts? And it's fascinating work. The challenge now is going to be turning this kind of technology into economic benefit for companies who actually want to make money with this technology. And a lot of that's in the more mundane conversational bot application spaces, at least for now.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, we'll have to dig into that more at another opportunity. So here's a question that I always like to ask, coming from the HPC supercomputing perspective at HPC Wire, and I know you have a long history of covering that space too. How do you view the relationship between HPC and AI, whether it's from a market or technical perspective, or both?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics. Spent a lot of time with folks at supercomputing, understanding what they're doing with AI, and it's clear to me that AI is a supplemental tool, does not replace classical simulation, but it could estimate what a simulation job would produce at maybe 1/1000th of the cost. Okay, so if I've got tens of thousands of simulation runs, I can train a neural network to estimate what a new simulation run with different starting conditions would deliver if you ran it. Okay, and it doesn't mean you won't run it. You will to continue to improve your AI prediction model. Okay, so I think that, you know, people building simulators, they're not out of work. It's just this is a new tool they can use to become more efficient.
Great. So is there anything else you'd like to flag about the AI hardware market or highlight about the upcoming summit, either the AI hardware summit or the AI or the Edge AI summit, or people who are participating in that?
Yeah, I would say that some folks, let's say at the executive levels in organizations, need to understand, many of them do, AI will be pervasive. It will be in every electronic product we buy and sell and use, from toys to automobiles. And so the ability to make AI useful depends on really good engineers, really good AI modelers, data scientists, as well as the hardware. But all that will be for naught if you're not running it on efficient hardware because you can't afford it, right? So this is all about making AI pervasive and affordable, and people overuse the term, but democratizing AI is still a goal. It's not where we are, but that takes it's going to take a lot of work to get there.
Great. Well, it's been great catching up with you, Karl. The AI Hardware Summit and Edge AI Summit take place September 13th through 15th, and there is more information and registration info on the AIHardwareSummit.com website.
Great. My pleasure, Tiffany. Always a pleasure to talk with you, and we'll see you at the event.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.